Hi, everybody. Welcome to Coffee Talk. This is your quick sip of the news, and I'm so glad you're with us today because today is a historic moment in American history where we are covering two really big news topics and in many ways turning the chapter on one part of the American story. And it's all happening on the same day. Two big themes: the U.S. southern border and the pandemic, and they're intertwined. We used to do these coffee talks all the time. It's one of the ways that I started to share smarter news with the world, and it's one of my favorite things to do, and I'd like to do it more. I used to do it, for those of you who are new to us, I used to do this when my 3-year-old and my 2-year-old were watching Sesame Street in the morning before I got them out for the day. This is how I would deliver the news. And then they got a little bit older, and then they had to go to school. And it was much more difficult to have coffee with friends and talk about the news when you got to get them to school on time. Plus, there were times during the last several years, think about what we've been through. There were just times that being this casual sometimes didn't feel even appropriate or required a little bit different approach. So I'd love to do this more. And this is what we often do. This is a sort of thing that we do on Scoop every week off of social media. And I'll make sure to mention that in the caption. So if you're interested in that, we can talk a little bit more about that. But I'm glad you're here. So let's talk about the two things that really matter. Number one, today will be the end of the public health emergency declared over COVID-19. And this is the one that was declared by Health and Human Services that's been in place since January 2020. So as of end of day today, that will expire. So they're not renewing that. What's happened repeatedly over the last several years is that it's been renewed and renewed. For example, public health emergencies, the opioid crisis. And what happens with the public health emergency is it frees up funds or resources to kind of flow in that direction. Think of it sort of like a tributary of money and resources to get to what really matters in the moment, that health emergency in the moment. It also puts in place certain requirements or loosens certain requirements. So in this case, the health industry can try to handle the health emergency. So that's going away as of tonight. And also expiring is Title 42, which is a policy related to the pandemic that was put in place regarding the U.S. southern border. And what that would allow the United States government to do through Border Patrol is to quickly expel people because there was a health emergency. People that came into the country without legal status could be quickly expelled. And that wasn't or isn't necessarily always the case at the border, which we're going to talk about. So let's tackle the public health emergency first. That's a little bit quicker, actually, because I just want to explain again why that matters. Number one, it matters symbolically because now we're no longer going to be under that umbrella. The real practical changes in your life probably aren't that significant. Here's an example. The public health emergency required private insurance companies to cover the costs of certain COVID tests, and that wouldn't necessarily be passed on to the consumer. That is going away. It was requiring labs to report test results, and that's going to go away. It's not going to take place in the same way. And so, one of the things that Health and Human Services said is, well, we may not get certain test results, certain negative test results we may not get. And that'll skew how we're looking about the presence of the virus that causes COVID-19 in certain communities. So those are certain changes that could take place. I was very interested to see some of the statistics that were put out about, what does COVID look like in America? And these were put out a couple weeks ago. So listen to this. The actual daily COVID cases that are being tracked have gone down 90% in recent times. So they're seeing a huge decline in cases, more than 80% decline in hospitalizations from where we were. And so this is some of the reasons why they're saying this is why we want to pull back this emergency declaration. How about this? What percentage or how many Americans do you think received one dose of one COVID vaccine? How many? There's about 330 million Americans in this country. So how many do you think? The number surprised me. I'm curious if it surprises you. 270 million. So more than 80% of the American population has received at least one dose. And obviously the definition of what it means to be fully vaccinated has changed, but just one dose, 270 million Americans. That was one of the other reasons they gave for pulling back this emergency declaration. So again, turning the page on this chapter, this public health emergency chapter in American history, at least for now. Doesn't mean there's doesn't mean there's not other health emergencies that are in place, like I mentioned, the opioid crisis. But I wanted to make sure that we made note of that. So let's talk a little bit about Title 42 now, because Title 42, the reason why Title 42 could even be in place is because there was a public health emergency. So when a public health emergency goes away, Title 42 doesn't have the same ability to be in place. And so again, why did it matter? It allowed for the quick expulsion of people that were coming into the country illegally. Now, there's a lot of nuance to talking about the border, and there's a lot of politics, obviously, as well. And I think you're going to be seeing a lot of that in the news over the next several weeks, because there's an uncertainty about what this will mean for the border. And let me explain why. Why this matters is that we're seeing historic numbers at the U.S. southern border, historic numbers of encounters. So these are people coming across the border being encountered by Border Patrol. It's important to note that these are the people that Border Patrol sees and either apprehends, arrests, is able to expel, or these people are allowed to stay, or they're taken into government custody. So there's a lot of different pathways if you come across the border and you're encountered by Border Patrol. But what doesn't change is the historic nature of the last several years. And I actually have a graph. I'm going to show this to you. It's not super effective, I know, on this Instagram Live, but I think it's really important nonetheless. And this is a graph that shows us nationwide encounters at the U.S. southern border. So the red line is 2020. I mean, this is when the border's closed. So that's like, we can't even really compare it to then because no one was doing anything at that time, right? The blue and yellow lines are 2021 and 2022. And then that black line, again, this is nationwide. So this is the northern and the southern border, is showing what's going on this year. The key takeaway is this: we have never seen these sort of numbers in modern data collection, ever. Now, I have to say modern data collection because our data really in a comparable way only dates back to the 1980s. So, could I say that with confidence? It didn't look that way in the 1950s. Wasn't exactly collected or recorded in the same ways. We've never seen this in our lifetime. So these numbers are just so large that it's important for you to know that. And with them being so large, having Title 42 enable Border Patrol as they're trying to process people to look at a certain individual and say, we're not going to allow you to pursue that asylum request. You're going to be expelled, and we're going to do this quickly. Without that being in place, there's a concern that Border Patrol loses an important tool during a historic time to remove people. And what does that look like as far as resources, and what does that mean for the United States? The Border Patrol has the border story has many different, it's like a kaleidoscope of different angles that you can take. There's a national security issue. There is a humanitarian angle to this story. There's an economic angle to this story. So there's all sorts of ways to look at when you're seeing such a record number of people coming into America. How do you handle this? And so we're seeing some really important changes that I want to also talk to you about today. Here's what else I want to show you. So here is, let me see, this is really small print. Here is what it looks like at the southwest land border, so the southern border. So I just want to give you, again, you can see the graphic, very much higher numbers. But I want to show you this. Look at what's going on at the northern border. Look at that. That black line is where we are this year. That yellow line was last year. So this isn't, the numbers are so much bigger at the southern border, without a doubt. But it's not just a southern border story. We're almost at the number of people encountered at the northern border at this point than we were for the entire last year. So that gives you an idea of the historic pace of this. And again, when we think about what this means, this is a challenge on so many different levels for Border Patrol, for the U.S. government, for our legal system. And so this is why this story really matters. And there's the unknown. If Title 42 goes away, not only does a tool of Border Patrol go away, but there's a question about perception. So the people that are coming to the U.S. southern border that want to enter the country, are they going to surge at the border now because they know that Border Patrol doesn't have that tool? And that's the expectation. But let's be cautious. And that's the expectation, by the way, by both Republicans and Democrats. It's not like one side is saying there's going to be a huge surge and the other side is saying no. No, both sides, including the administration, is cautioning people, saying this is going to be, I think the president used the term chaotic. There is going to be a period of adjustment here, and it's something to be aware of. The other thing that I think is really important that, again, sort of takes us out of politics just for the moment here is that this topic of asylum. So when people cross into the country without legal status and they say, wait a minute, Border Patrol, I'm here because I'm seeking asylum, that automatically sort of puts them in a different channel than someone that Border Patrol confronts and says, hey, clearly you're a part of a criminal element. I'm using extreme examples here. So the asylum seeker suddenly becomes an asylum seeker under kind of this U.S. legal umbrella. And although they didn't come in with legal status, if they're allowed to pursue asylum, then they have permission to stay and do that. One of the major changes that the administration has just made is that this idea of pre-screening for asylum before your 2 feet are on American soil, because that's the incentive to get here. If I can get 2 feet here and my case seems like it could go somewhere, then I'll be given permission to stay. And that's part of the incentive. So one of the things that the administration is saying is they're going to set up these processing centers in places like Colombia, for example, and try to start an early screening process. That's something I've never seen before, because typically if you're outside the country and you're looking to come in, you're seeking refuge. You're a refugee. An asylum seeker has kind of the same qualifications as a refugee, someone who says they're being persecuted and they can't go home because of that, but they're in the United States. And that's a real major difference. So we're seeing a change there as this administration tries to figure out, how do we slow down the pace? How do we slow down the pace? And let me say this, because we're entering into such a heated political season as we're going into a presidential cycle. One of the benefits that we've had together is we have seen very different leadership at the U.S. southern border, haven't we? You have President Biden, you have President Trump. By the way, President Obama and President Bush, they had very different philosophies and leadership styles. And yet, this issue at the border of being concerned about the number of people coming across, being concerned about, and we're going to be sharing this in Smarter News, concerns about drugs or criminals. We're looking at what is Border Patrol actually saying they're doing on a regular basis, and we're going to share that with you, because while all this talk is happening at this level, hey, let's talk to the people that are actually confronting this on a daily basis. And I want you to see what they're talking about. So we've seen a lot of different strategies, and so far the pace hasn't changed. What Secretary Mayorkas, the Secretary of Department of Homeland Security, says is this is a regional issue. It's not just an American issue, something that's taking place in the Western Hemisphere, the movement of people that we've never seen in decades. So it's not just a United States issue. There are those that would absolutely disagree with that and say it's a policy issue and that we don't have the right policies in place and therefore there's no real deterrence. So I'm curious how you feel about this. Depending on where you live, this hits in different ways, right? If you live in a border state, you're probably hearing a lot about this. If you're not in a border state, you may be wondering, why does this affect me? And that's why I think it's important to think about this story. Again, national security, the economics of it, government resources, the humanitarian side. There's also the political side. And remember, in 2016, one of the major issues was the U.S. southern border. It has a tendency to become a major political issue before an election. And so it's something also to watch for that reason. So those are the two big stories today, guys. So here we are on a Thursday. It feels like a regular Thursday. Here we are. And it's the end of the public health emergency for COVID. And it's the end of Title 42. And what comes next is kind of the big question that remains. So are there any questions I can answer for you guys today while we're here? If there's any questions or comments, or I would love to just answer them. And also if you're joining us later, put some of your questions in the comments and I'll come back and revisit them. I also try to take these videos. It's not always easy with Instagram. I try to take these videos and put them up on YouTube too, so you're able to see them in a different way. While you're thinking about your questions, let me just leave you with this. We have Mother's Day, because I think it's good. Again, there's so much talk of political divisiveness, right? How many times have we heard that term? Can we collect quarters for that? We can make a lot of money, right? Well, in this time of political divisiveness, Mother's Day is such an interesting holiday because everyone thinks it's just about mothers. Well, the woman that started Mother's Day, her mom was an exceptional person. And one of the things that she navigated was political divisiveness. She was in what would be considered Appalachia, really a poor area, West Virginia, in the 1850s, where she was trying to teach, this is Anna Jarvis's mom, try to teach sanitation to moms. Like, how do you boil water, and how do you do some basic healthcare? And this started, and then suddenly the Civil War hit, and she decided, I'm not picking sides. Like, I'm going to serve all families. I don't care if you're North or you're South, because they're kind of right on the dividing line there. We're going to care for everybody. We're not picking sides. And then after the Civil War, her mom continued with these clubs to try to bring people together who had just a few months earlier been fighting each other. And so that is the mom. That is the mom that inspired Mother's Day. And so think about that. It's such an amazing history. We'll have a little bit more on our site on that. So anyways, I just wanted to jump on real quick, you guys. I really appreciate it. Thank you for rolling with us in Smarter News and believing in quick, concise, nonpartisan news, and really being part of building a solution in news during a time when it's really easy to feel like it doesn't exist. I believe it can exist. It will exist. And you're making it possible. So I look forward to your questions. I don't want to keep talking and waste your time. One of the things I want for you is your story is just as important as any story that I'm reporting. So you should have more time, more freedom to live that story, and then get a little bit of news from us and get going. So really appreciate your support. Thank you so much. And again, if you like this is what I'm doing on Scoop on a regular basis. I'm doing it off of social media because I know we all need a break from that. And also sometimes Instagram can get a little glitchy. No offense to Instagram, the Instagram people that are listening. And sometimes we have to cover really tough topics that are not always best discussed on social media. So if you like this and you really believe in our mission, check us out there. I'll make sure that that's available in the bio so you can check it out. All right, guys, have a great day. And I look forward to your questions, comments, and concerns. And we'll have more on smarternews.com. Talk to you soon.